Good afternoon, everyone. I am Elizabeth Carell Richards, and welcome to Ask Me Anything this afternoon. It certainly is odd when we have to do things over Zoom. We wish we were able to do this in person, but we're also so grateful for Zoom that we're able to do this and connect with you. I am from Atlanta. I'm married to Ken Richards, and we live here with our two children. Ken nor I went to the University of Georgia, but my parents went to Georgia, and both my kids went there. I have a daughter who graduated a little over 2 years ago from the Terry College of Business, works here in Atlanta in digital marketing, and a son who's on his last semester who will graduate in December from Terry as well, with a real estate and an entrepreneurship degree. So excited to be part of this. We really just got engrossed in Georgia through the love that I saw through my parents and through my children, and are thrilled to be here today. The last 3 years, I chaired the Parents Leadership Council, which is a group of parents who really want to be more engaged at UGA through learning and giving. They financially support key initiatives at the university that aren't otherwise able to be funded. And they gain in-depth knowledge of the priorities of the university while interacting and engaging with the faculty as well as their students. If you aren't familiar with the PLC, I really encourage you to look into it. Right now, I currently serve as the board member of the University of Georgia Foundation Board, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here and learn more with y'all as we talk today from these really strong panelists. We're lucky to have them with us. This is the first Ask Me Anything that really is gauged towards our parents and not our alumni. I hope that you'll use it as an opportunity to learn more, to ask some questions. There's a function that's a Q&A down at the bottom of your screen, and after the panelists to give their presentation, you'll have a chance to ask questions, and I hope you will. As the FedEx guy told me today when I asked if I could guarantee delivery on something, he said, no, nothing's guaranteed. And I think that pretty much sums up these times right now. Nothing's guaranteed. But we hope this is working for you, and we hope that you'll feel a little bit more a part of the University of Georgia. Today, both of our panelists are from the Division of Student Affairs. Dr. Carrie Smith and Dr. Beau Seagraves, they lead the office that's known as Student Care and Outreach. This office strives to provide individualized assistance for students when they have hardships or circumstances where they need some help. They support the faculty and staff in working with these students when they're in distress or really just need anything. And they also really guide parents to seek the help and information on behalf of their students. Today, we're going to focus on how student care and outreach will be a resource for you, especially during the midst of COVID-19 and the challenges on campus. Welcome to everyone here. I'm going to introduce Carrie and Beau and let you hear from them. And then when they're finished, we'll do some Q&A.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I know that we've got a number of people from on campus and around the community that want to learn more about what Student Care and Outreach is doing to support students. We're going to talk about it specifically related to COVID-19, but we also want to make sure that you understand what we're doing for COVID-19 and for students during COVID-19 is really an extension of what we do for students throughout the year through Student Care and Outreach. So with that, we'll begin our presentation so that we can share that. So Student Care and Outreach is often the starting point for students, families, faculty, and staff who are navigating concerns of all kinds. And so students that may have academic issues, we may not provide academic advising through Student Care and Outreach, but we want to make sure that the student has access to that academic advising. So we're going to be that conduit sometimes to that academic advisor or the Division of Academic Enhancement or any of the other myriad resources that we have. Substance abuse students may struggle with, and we want to make sure that they get connected to those resources. Change in financial situation, I'll tell you, that's been one of the pieces that we've seen the most over the last several months, as we've noticed and had students reaching out to us needing financial assistance as a result of economic and personal financial situations that have changed over the last several months. Emotional distress and mental health resources. Again, we don't provide counseling in our office. That's really important, but we want to make sure that students get connected to those places where they can get that clinical support. They may experience a death of a family member or friend. They have social and adjustment issues that are often expected for first year students, but many times we'll see students who are second, third, and even fourth year students who come to our office who realize that what they were going through and what they were dealing with early in their career at UGA may be different than what they're going through now, and they're having a hard time adjusting to it. And then we recognize that students experience a variety of complex family issues and how we can help them navigate support structures here at UGA. So again, being that hub of care and support, all of these things happen to students while they're here. We hope that by engaging with our office that the path is a little bit smoother for having done so. Now, during COVID-19, one of the important lessons or one of the important pieces we want students to know, and faculty and staff too, they should utilize the dog check app. So every morning during the weekday, students will get either a text or an email or both that will encourage them to go and onto dog check and report symptoms that may result in them needing to isolate or quarantine. And they're required to go on to dog check if they have tested positive for COVID-19. Anytime a student gets one of those responses that says they need to quarantine or they need to isolate, or if they've tested positive, our staff here in Student Care and Outreach are going to be notified. We're notified through the application. We then have a team here of case managers, and Carrie and I will respond to those. We will triage them, determine what the highest priorities are depending on what the student needs. We're going to then get that student, we're going to connect with that student directly and then find out what it is that they're experiencing. Do they need us to contact their instructors? Do they need assistance with housing? How about meals? Do they need assistance with, we've coordinated with housing and dining for students that live on campus that get connected to those resources and get them moved if they need to move. But more importantly, we just want to make sure that they know that somebody else is aware of what's going on and somebody else cares about what's going on to them. We recognize that if them being out of class can be a stressor to them, and so we want to help provide a seamless connection back to their instructors, and we recognize that instructors are looking to us for information on how to best support students. So the more that we can serve as that conduit between students and instructors, the better off that student's experience is going to be when they're experiencing something that they've never experienced before. I'll tell you that we hope that many of our students will be able to return to their permanent residences if they find that they're unable to, if they find that they are needing to isolate, quarantine, or have tested positive. We also recognize that that might not be an option for some students for a variety of good reasons. So we're going to utilize those networks that we already have through housing and dining and in the community to get students connected to those resources that they may need access to so that they can facilitate and continue to engage in their coursework, assuming that they're well enough to do so. That's what we do during the year when a student tests positive for any number of issues, or if they have any other concerns that prevent them from being able to go to class. So again, this COVID-19 response, specifically how we're getting that information, is coming more systematically through dog check, but our response to that is going to be very consistent with how we support our students throughout the year. It's going to be very tailored, very personalized. We're going to work with each individual student, and we're going to provide the support that they need to accomplish the goals they have for themselves. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to talk more about what we do in student care and outreach throughout the year.
So as Beau mentioned, a lot of what we're doing in COVID is really a well-oiled machine that we do every day, regardless of the circumstances that students are facing. When we talk about what we do, we put it into these 4 buckets. I've sort of highlighted the 3 buckets we're going to focus on in red so that I can go over a little bit about what exactly it is that we do. Beau and I, right before this, were making a joke that we were going to say we had invited our families to join because they don't actually know what we do every day. So you're in great company, given that we just say we help students. But to get a little bit more specific, going to start with that first box about that direct support. Like Beau said, we really are about creating a personalized network of help for a student. We're really lucky here at the University of Georgia that we have so many offices and people and incredible networks that we can plug students in. So a lot of times when we talk about being the starting point for students, we're talking about being that resource for resources. I think sometimes it's tough to keep up with what all UGA is able to offer because there is so much here. And so it's really our job to know what those resources are. We've created some incredible websites that list those resources, but I think we all know that when you're navigating complex circumstances, either you or your child or your family member, sometimes it's tough enough just to know, okay, who do I call first? How do I get someone to pick up the phone? And it's those little things that we can manage for you in terms of being that resource for resources. We also are the office that responds to faculty and staff concerns. I think sometimes it's hard to believe that a school of this size, faculty know when students aren't in their classes. But I can tell you, even when we went into online learning in the spring, students, faculty were aware when students weren't engaging on different message boards or perhaps noticed some sort of change in their behavior in class. We're the office that they call. We do a lot of outreach to faculty and staff to make sure that they know they can also use us as a starting point. But what that allows for us to do is to gather additional information about how students are showing up in the classroom so that we can then address that directly with the students well as part of kind of their larger network. And then finally, this piece, which I think we really try to express as much as possible, and especially for this audience, collaborating with parents and families. I think a lot of times our phone number just happens to be the one that people find, but also it's the one that gets answered. We really pride ourselves on answering the phone whenever anyone calls, and there's really no phone call we won't take. I know we've had even our colleagues in the division that have said, is that okay to get someone to call you for that? Or is that really what y'all do? And the way Beau and I have looked at it, and really our entire staff, is, well, if we aren't the right people, then it's our job to figure out who the right people are. So you don't have this telephone game or calling all of these offices. You can really just start with us. And again, we'll try to figure out what your next steps are. I really think about families who are experiencing these complex circumstances or looking at people who are impacted by COVID-19 right now, just to be able to make the process more efficient and effective for families who are navigating those circumstances can be incredibly helpful. Looking over sort of to the right of that, providing interventions. So these are really the day-to-day things that we do in student care and outreach that give you kind of tangible items so you can say, okay, I understand when my child might need that, or I understand when I might need that. The first is hardship withdrawals. So there are times when students need to step away from school for whatever reason. And our office is often the one that they come to talk about making that decision. We will talk through that. We don't ever tell anyone to withdraw. It's really about figuring out what's best for that student's circumstances. And we work with families and parents, so we make sure it's really a collective decision that everyone supports. But once we get past a certain point in the semester, students can't withdraw themselves. And so they'll need to come through our office to do that. I will tell you that what comes up a lot is, well, if my child waits for a hardship withdrawal, will it look differently on their GPA? The fact of the matter is, come in, sit down with us, we'll talk through it. But a withdrawal is a withdrawal and allows for students to walk away from campus, return when they're ready to feel successful, and we can support them all along the way. The next thing is absence notifications. Something that people also don't realize that we do very often is that we communicate with faculty when students aren't able to do so, or when they're busy tending to some personal circumstances. The one that comes to mind most often for me is death in the family. Perhaps a student's got to step away to either care for a loved one who is sick, or perhaps there's been a death. What we can do is certainly encourage the student to communicate directly with their faculty, but sometimes when our office sends that email, it allows for the conversation to feel a little bit more natural. And at the end of the day, it just provides another layer of justification for the student's excuse. Finally, that incidence response, and then I'm going to get into Embark at UGA. But the incidence response is something we started because of unfortunate circumstances where we saw large populations within our campus being affected by certain things, specifically natural disasters. So, of course, a couple of years ago, we had back-to-back hurricanes, then we had tornadoes that devastated certain areas. We're able to use institutional data to reach out to students who have home addresses in that area and not necessarily ask for them to respond, but just say, hey, student care and outreach is here. If it is affecting you, if it is affecting your family, let us know. It also helps us just put our name out there to students, because what we found is that during that time, students might be able to take care of themselves, or nothing complex is coming out of that specific incident we're responding to. But months down the road, when something does go wrong, they remember that they got that email and they again come back to us to be that resource of resources, which is incredibly important. And then finally, the only really specific initiative that we have within our program we have within our office is a program called Embark at UGA. Embark at UGA is a program that serves students who've experienced foster care or homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. This is an incredibly invisible population on our campus, and so we work with campus partners to identify those students, and then we provide them with several things: specific programming like life skill building, financial planning, and then also just community building workshops, so allowing them to come together, meet one another, and exchange experiences. We've also recently begun to pilot out a program that allows for private donors to be able to give money to the Embark at UGA Journey Fund, which upon completion of a couple of things within that program, we can give money to students so that they can engage in experiential learning opportunities, specifically internships or study abroad. It's been an incredibly successful program, and it's, again, one of the specific populations that we serve. And then finally, I want to talk about that last piece, that idea of gathering information. One of the things that our office, again, really focuses on, as Beau mentioned, is trying to be as personalized as possible to students. So when we have new staff come on and we have to onboard them, I have to tell them there are no flowcharts. There's no if this then that. You don't always do this, sometimes do that. It's really about learning the experience of that student and figuring out what they need in that moment. The other way that we do this is by documenting their interactions across campus in order to build that plan. We can certainly be a student's person, if you will, to help them walk the path. But with all the amazing people at UGA, it's important to us to also bring in those people who may already have established relationships with the student. Maybe it's faculty, maybe it's advisors, whatever that looks like, so that the student feels like they have a team of support. This is really a way that we make a really big place seem a little bit smaller for the student, and whether that makes it easier to navigate or makes a student feel like they're a little bit more empowered to ask for help, either way it works. I'm not focusing so much on outreach since we're doing that now, but we often do trainings for our faculty, staff, and students across campus, and are certainly in the middle of that as we gear up, even in the virtual sense, to get ready for this next semester. So as I mentioned, we build this individualized network of support, and I want to sort of talk through what that looks like, because I think sometimes that sounds like a tagline that's not really easy to picture. But essentially, when a student comes into the office, we want to make sure that we understand what their needs are, both immediately and thinking ahead for the rest of the semester or their time at UGA. So if the student's at the center of this network of support, it's my job as an SCO staff member to be a part of that network of support, but then to fill each one of those pockets of support around the student so that they feel true holistic support from the university. So for instance, a student might come in who's struggling in a math class. Well, the initial thought is that they just need tutoring, but upon talking to the student further, maybe I learned that they have some family issues. Perhaps their parents have recently been divorced, they want to change their major, they're not really sure how to go about that. And so all of a sudden, I'm peeling back those layers to figure out, okay, first stop first, academic advisor, you want to change your major. Let's figure out, do you really want to change your major? Do you want to change colleges? What's that look like? And who are the people that the student can seek out to speak to? Essentially, I'm just providing a soft handoff for the student to make it a little bit easier, rather than sending them into that spiral of the Google search that gets them to have all the opportunities at UGA, which can be overwhelming. Then perhaps I'm figuring out what activities they're involved in, or the things that they can do that just make them happy through social supports. Maybe they've just recently been diagnosed with a disability, and so I want to get them connected to a coordinator at the Disability Resource Center. And then finally, faculty. I think students sometimes underestimate the level of care that faculty really have for our student population. And so sometimes just demystifying that is part of our job, helping them understand that going to a faculty member's office hours may actually pay off. But also just to help them understand how that faculty member can fit into this bigger team of support to help them achieve the goals as they define them, not as anyone else does.
So how can we get connected with students? I think it's important to know that we will respond to email. Students can call us, parents can call us, visit us in the Tate Student Center. Even during this time, we will be accepting, we'll have walk-ins and be able to meet with students. We're right between Panda Express and Starbucks, so we're really not hard to find on the third floor of the Tate Center in the Dean of Students office. And then lastly, we encourage individuals to fill out an online report. That online report is at sco.uga.edu. And if you go to that tab and go to that site, you can see it. Basically, you click there, it drops down, it drops into our database and our email. And that for us, it's a way of being able to immediately respond. A parent can contact us through that. That doesn't mean that we're going to immediately reach out to the student. We're going to respond to a parent. We'll probably respond to the individual who made that report first, so that we can get more information. Maybe it is that you need to be the person to share that information with the student, and we just want to make sure you have that information. So again, reporting a concern for a student is just another way for us to collect information and respond in an efficient way, especially during this time when we realize it's going to be busy. So with that, I want to open up the floor and turn it back over, I guess, to Elizabeth and answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate this, and I know the people on the Zoom do as well. I think one thing that, I am still a current parent, and I have been a parent for about 6 years at Georgia, if you add it all up. And one thing I just want to say that I feel so fortunate about is this certainly is a large university, but there's such an effort made to make it feel smaller. But so much of that falls on us. It really falls on the parent to make sure you're finding ways to stay engaged and being part of your student's life. I know that when my first child first went to college, knowing that this whole you pay the bills but you don't have access to the grades sort of thing means, well, they're independent. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. They don't want that. And I think that's really, that's just not the way it is at Georgia. And I really encourage you to reach out, learn more about the university, learn more about the resources that are there. And the fact that you're on this today really shows you're taking the first step. The university is taking such an initiative to spend the time, to spend the money to make sure we've got a safe campus right now. And I think that a lot of you that I've heard about are questions on, what exactly is happening. And I've gotten a question right here that's in the Q&A. So right now, I want you to go down to the Q&A box and ask any question. If it's not relevant right now, we will find you the answer. We will help put you in the right place so that you can get that answered. But use that tab down there so you can ask questions. I've got one question that popped up right now about classes being held online. And I know that many of the professors are doing kind of a dual online in-person sort of thing. But I think the question right now comes in from Lou and wants to know what is the effort being made to make sure the kids have some version of interaction, that they're on campus, they're experiencing an on-campus experience, but also they're getting education. So I'm going to let Beau and Carrie kind of handle that one real quick.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think it's a good one, and it's going to be different for every student because depending on the courses in which a student is enrolled is going to depend on whether or not they're going to be shifted to an all online course for the semester, or they're going to be both, or they're going to be in person or some kind of hybrid, right? And so I think the instructors are going through that, in the instruction is going through and noting that for students via Athena. So the question I think specifically related to how will students know that. So students should be able to refer to Athena to determine whether or not a class is going to be shifted to fully online instruction or if it will include the in-person. The second piece is I would encourage the student, many instructors are already uploading syllabi to ELC, which is our e-learning commons, and that's our kind of online class management system. And so encourage them to go ahead and pull that and look and see if they have syllabi on there. And then lastly, if they still can't get the information via Athena or via ELC, they're welcome to email instructors directly and find out from those instructors whether or not they're going to be having class in person or if they're going to have class remote. But I would say that the majority of the information, if it's still listed in Athena as being in a classroom, then that's where that student needs to be prepared to go, absent getting any other direct information from their instructors directly.
And I've got another question that it is kind of similar, but a little bit different in that obviously the students are getting a little stressed by this. I think it's, nobody likes change, but I think the kids are a little stressed on the fact that it's going back and forth, and some moments it's online and the next minute it's in class. And what are the professors and what is the administration doing to help make sure there is some consistency and that they're able to have studies that are pretty regular and that they can adapt to these changes with activities that aren't as interactive this year as they have been in the past? Can you just talk specifically about what are some changes there? I know I've seen some posts that even in the libraries or in Tate, they're spacing them out. So they're still able to go, but the spacing is a little bit different. Can you talk just a little bit about on campus, how they'll still be able to have some normalcy, but there's some changes as well?
Sure. There, part of where we, so the spaces on campus are still going to be open, as was said. They're going to, for example, the Tate Center where we are located does have, we have had to space out furniture and those kinds of things, but there's still spaces for students to gather. The academic buildings are still, or will be absolutely open and available for students. The Ramsey Center is spread out equipment throughout the entire building. So usually there's the strength and conditioning rooms 1 and 2. And if you've ever been in Ramsey, those middle gym, the middle huge gym that's right behind the entrance desk is now strength and conditioning equipment. They won't be having, they won't be able to play, students won't be able to play basketball in those spaces, but they'll be able to use the strength and conditioning equipment. They're still going to have their fitness courses, fitness classes, those kinds of things. Student organizations will still be alive and thriving. They will be having to meet in ways that are unique, right? And so they may have to find spaces that are larger than they're used to being in so that they can meet in a way that would honor the expectations around for social distancing. But we are in our activities, student activities folks down in the Center for Engagement, Leadership and Service are working to provide opportunities for students to engage with one another, even virtually. So we recognize that they may not be able to have a huge concert, right? But they will still be able to provide entertainment for students. And so all of that that's been what staff for the last 3 to 4 months have been working to bring to students, because we recognize that there's that's an important part of the college experience. That's why many of us chose to work in this environment, right? And so we want to promote that in a way that will honor that and give students that experience that they want, but also recognize that this is unique and this is different and it's going to feel different for students, but it is going to be, we're hopeful that they can find ways to connect with one another and build that community.
Yeah, I'll also just add, university housing, for instance, has an entire curriculum and activities that they do, and they've just recently spent a good bit of time transitioning those over to be COVID friendly, if you will. So to provide for as much interaction that can occur digitally and also find spaces, as Beau mentioned. I think that the Division of Academic Enhancement, it's also important to mention that now. The question previously is kind of about uncertainty and is it online or is it not? And I think, unfortunately, we got a chance to practice some of that transition in the spring. And so we've been able to refine those processes as we move into the fall. And so we work really closely with our Division of Academic Enhancement to figure out how students can adapt their learning styles and get connected to the right people who can show them how to do so if for whatever reason they're in a hybrid class or maybe they're in person, and then also having online courses. And I'll also just say it's been really interesting to see the number of students who've been able to continue to engage over the summer, either through SGA or through other student organizations. The Greek Life Office comes to mind, where the students are also really contributing to the ideas to come up with ways to keep one another engaged. And so I think that's also another thing about UGA that's so special, is that the students have been a part of this process and their voices have been heard as we've tried to be solution focused and in what to do to maintain that level of interaction, or as much as we can, for students who are coming.
Great. So I've gotten a few questions that focus specifically around the testing of COVID. I think that there seems to be some concern about, are we relying on the students to test themselves? Is it voluntary? Is it random? That sort of thing. And then in addition to that, what is the process for the specific process when a student tests positive for COVID, especially if they're out of state? Do they have somewhere specific to go? Or even if they're just on campus, what would be the next steps for that? So the questions on specific testing and then the reaction to that.
Sure. So the university's approach to testing is what they're calling what's being called surveillance testing, and so we are it's voluntary, and they are doing that at Legion Field. They've set up an operation, frankly, over there to test individuals throughout the week and throughout the semester. We recognize that many students that may not there are going to be students who seek and get tested elsewhere, and any student, to get to the very specific question of what happens, any student who tests positive is required to report, any individual, faculty, staff, or student is required to report that through the Dog Check app. From there, if a student is on campus and living on campus and needs and is unable to return to their primary residence to quarantine or isolate, depending on the circumstances, then we will work with housing, and housing has established a process to provide students with locations in which they can isolate or quarantine away from their room. If they need to, so there's going to be spaces for them to do that. If they are already living in a space on campus, like an apartment, where they can isolate in an apartment or quarantine in an apartment, they're going to be encouraged to do that if they cannot return home, because that's the best place for them, and they're not taking another spot from someone who lives in one of the high rises, for example. And then lastly, students that are off campus, and dining will also be involved in that, and providing meals and getting meals delivered in those cases. Students that are off campus are going to be encouraged to stay where they are. If they cannot return to their primary residence, their first option is to stay in those locations where they're currently living. And then if that's not an option for that student, depending on whatever living situation they find themselves, we'll work to coordinate based on available spaces at that time. But we cannot guarantee, frankly, that a student who lives off campus will be brought on campus for a quarantine, for example, or an isolation space. But we're going to work with that student individually, depending on the circumstances, and really try to identify what options are available to them at that point.
So just a follow up for another question, if the student is out of state versus in state, there's really no different process. So they're really still going to have, especially if they're in the dorm, they will have the support, they will have meals, there's a place for isolation, that sort of thing.
If they cannot return to their primary residence, even if they're local, a student who's local, they can't go to their primary residence for one reason or another, and they will have a place to go if they live on campus. We'll work with them, and housing has identified spaces for them to go.
So another question, which is really something that I think the whole country is talking about, but at least from the University of Georgia perspective, is really the Career Center and job interviewing, job recruiting, those sort of things that are going on for the kids that are really even the underclassmen who are looking for internships in the future, or for the permanent job placement market. Are those career fairs? What is the process that's still going to be able to take place given the restrictions, and how will the students be able to interact with a network so that they're able to do this safely, but they'll also be in a position where they can become employed?
Sure, that's one of you're right, that's a national, it's a question that's happening broadly. I don't have specific information about what the Career Center is planning. I do know that that many individual majors work very closely with employers that would employ students from those majors and provide those opportunities for more individualized networking. The Career Center, I'm certain, will be, trying to again, facilitate those opportunities for employers to connect with our students. That's what they do, and they do an amazing job of it. So what specific plans and when those will be aren't I don't know that at this point, and I'm sure that will be posted to their social media and website if it's not already done so. I just haven't seen it yet.
I think there's actually one coming up within the first week of school. Actually, there's an internship and I think part-time job fair that they're hosting. They use a platform called Handshake that we send students to all the time that has job postings, but also allows for some interactive engagement with employers and those seeking positions. So I echo what Beau said, and I also know that employers, from what I've heard from students and colleagues at the career fair, employers are trying to figure out how to connect with UGA students as much as UGA students are trying to figure out how to connect with them, given that we are all within this environment across the U.S.
I also will encourage you as a parent to encourage your student to be proactive about this. Having had a child go through the recruitment process and graduation, those sorts of things, making sure that their child is reaching out to their college, making sure they're part of this, getting on Handshake. I mean, I think that there was a little bit of a sentiment in my house that somehow people were going to come knocking on the door just because they had a graduation degree, that they're going to just have people just come knock down the door because they're just so employable. And the reality is they are employable, but they need to be proactive with that. So I'd encourage you to tell your students to reach out to people and make that connection, because I think the university does an incredible job. I think it's over 97% of the graduates have jobs within a few months out of graduation. So they really do place these kids well. But the world's different now. We've got to all figure this out together. There's a request from Folly Ann to repeat where the students' voices and opinions can be heard. There seems to be a bit of frustration because the kids' morales are dropping. So, and what is available for them so that they can talk to people and get connected? What's the best way for a student to do that?
So I know that the Student Government Association, they did a survey and collected student information there. That's the primary voice for students, right? So if that's where I would encourage students to get connected with the SGA early, and they're welcome to do that through our Center for Engagement, Leadership and Service on the first floor of the Tate Center. So that would be my first place if they want to kind of connect and provide and amplify voice and those kinds of things. That's also a place within the Center for Engagement, Leadership, and Service from a morale perspective, where students have the opportunity to really find community. We have involvement ambassadors, those kinds of things that's their job, is to get students, their peers, get students can find out what they're interested in, get them connected to those things that would be of interest. And then the service components too, through ELS and Engagement, Leadership, and Service, are another place where students can find community and build that morale. But from a true wanting to share their voice and opinion, that tends to be through SGA a great place to start.
I will say that in terms of building morale, and I think this is where we do this year round, even if there wasn't we weren't in this situation with COVID, but this idea of a lack of connection and not really being able to find that. ELS, as Beau's mentioned multiple times, it's just really the hub of getting engaged and connected on campus and building community. But if for whatever reason, and I think this is where we come back to kind of sometimes being the generalist of things. If a student is just really still not feeling like they're making the connection points that they want to, maybe they feel like they've put themselves out there and they're not, that's again where that's a concern that they could come to Student Care and Outreach for, and we could really talk to them about what exactly they're looking for and try to parse through what engagement even means to that student, or what low morale really even means to that student. Is it that really they just don't like their roommate? Or is it that they're trying to figure out ways to be more involved in student government? And that's again where it's not, really specific and overarching in terms of what the university is necessarily doing, because each student does kind of have different priorities and needs and frustrations. So I agree with Beau in terms of obviously I agree with Beau, but in terms of the SGA being the voice, but also just want to say that having low morale or that transition in that first semester, that happens for almost all of our students who come here and involved in some sort of transition. And on top of that, it's just going to look a little bit different. And so feel free to engage our office as students look to navigate that moving forward.
And we did get an update that August 26th is going to be the career fair. So it'll be virtual and they'll be able to connect with people, but the career consultants are working with students to make sure that they have some meetings and consultations. So it looks like that is set for August 26th. You might want to push your student to pay attention and look for things for that as well. There's a question on, do we have a plan, or does the university have any plans for reaching a certain percentage of COVID tests that are positive that they go all virtual? Is there really kind of a set way to do that? What if there's an outbreak? What if Athens as a community becomes a hotspot? You know, what is it that the university is going to do, and how do they gauge how they go through the process of virtual versus in person? How do they make those decisions?
So as we have seen throughout this entire experience, much of those decisions are being made at the system level. So, that's the University System of Georgia with all 26 institutions. So I don't have information about testing, a particular percentage of students or faculty staff that would prompt a shift to remote learning. I don't know that information. I will say that the faculty have been encouraged and have been given opportunities to train related to what they're calling preparing to pivot. And so faculty cohorts have been through that training this summer, and the goal being that instructors that are teaching in class now need to be prepared to shift to remote learning later. The decision was already made for after Thanksgiving for all courses to be shifted to remote and all final exams to be managed remotely and online. So that could be moved earlier in the semester if that's the decision that gets made centrally. So that's the extent of, from an academic perspective, that's what I know.
And I think just to add from the board level, what we're hearing is, to echo what Beau said, the Board of Regents really does make the decisions for the entire state of Georgia. And certainly there's some freedom for the University of Georgia to make some decisions, but a lot of the main decisions are made on an overarching system level. So what you see that Georgia Southern will experience, we'll hear the same sort of things in all the other schools. Stan would like to know if you could give some advice on ways for the parents and the families, the roommates, all sorts of people that are different relationships among the university. How can they plan to be ready? What advice would you give so that they're able, you use the word pivot, and I think that's a really important way to look at it. How can they be ready to pivot and make an immediate change if all of a sudden they wake up one day and everything's online, or their dorm is all of a sudden a hotspot? What is some advice you can give to the incoming students especially?
Go
ahead.
Well, one of the things that and Beau's going to get more specific, I feel confident, but one of the things that I think is really important for students, parents, families, and I know this sounds very obvious, but is to ask questions. I think that just even having this Ask Me Anything, or feeling like you can call and ask questions, is really important. I think arming yourself with information and understanding that there's some questions that we don't have the answer to, as you see, whether it's knowing when the career fair is or knowing what the Board of Regents is going to decide. There are some things that we can share with you that can be resources and people and places, or even just websites to stay attuned to, so that you can get the most up-to-date information in real time, so you're not feeling like you're hearing it 3 days later in the newspaper. And so understanding how to tap into those resources and asking what they are, I think, is important. The other thing that's pretty specific to students, and I suppose their roommates, assuming that their roommate is also a student, is that what we find a lot with students at UGA, especially within our office, is given the caliber of student that comes to the University of Georgia, sometimes it feels like asking for help is a sign of weakness. And so what I would also say is, as we prepare for pivoting, if at any point in time a student feels like they're not adjusting, even if we are still in what we would call traditional school, but we're not really there right now, raise your hand and ask for help. Figure out who your person is on campus that you feel comfortable doing that. For parents and for families, I think encouraging your student to seek those people out is important. I think we underestimate the level of support we have in the K-12 environment, or who our person was in our community or at our school, or that one math teacher I could always go to after school. And it wasn't about math. It was just because I was having a bad day. And so I would encourage students to figure out who you feel connected to on campus and develop that relationship. So when that point of pivot comes, if it does, you'll feel like you've got a connection point to this university and this campus, even if for whatever reason we're not physically in the classroom or physically here.
A couple other strategies or things that I would encourage on this particular topic is engaging in that dialogue now, having the conversation now with students and parents about what the expectations are, what their thoughts and plans are. I like conceive of this. It's more than just being 6 feet apart and wearing a face covering, right? It's got to be about, what is that going to look like if you test positive? Are you going to be able to come home? If you're not going to be able to come home, what does that look like? Students that are going to be on campus and having to isolate and quarantine are going to have to isolate and quarantine by themselves for that entire period. There won't be visitors coming to those spaces. There'll be the essential food, those kinds of things getting to those students, but there won't be any social interaction by nature. And so preparing the mindset for what that could look like for someone who has to stay here is very real conversation that needs to happen. It can't be an in the moment type thing, because then it's often too late, because you're already dealing with the uncertainty around a diagnosis or the rest of it. So just, again, that kind of initial conversation in being prepared. If someone is from out of state and you are concerned about a child having to quarantine on or isolate on campus, are their family members closer? Are their roommates' families closer? Having those conversations earlier. Fraternity brothers, sorority sisters, those kinds of things. What community is the student creating early in their time here so that they can rely and build upon that community when they need it? Because you would provide that same support to them if that was your student. I would also say it's imperative that students start strong. Start the semester strong. Parents, the question, I encourage you to open up your calendar right now. The second week of class, write a note to yourself. So that would be, let's just say August 30th, 10 days into class. If you ask your student who their professors are, what classes they're in, and who their professors are, and if they can't answer those questions directly and quickly, that's a problem. They haven't started strong. So asking those questions and having that information, especially for incoming students, will be really important to setting them up for success long-term when we don't know what it's going to look like. We're all making plans, and we all recognize that we have to be willing to be flexible and change. And that's the name of the game for students is going to be. And so the expectations, and we recognize this particular incoming class dealt with so much change at the end of their senior years in high school, right? And so we know that that's going to be a challenge for them, but we want to make sure that they're prepared now in a way that they couldn't have been prepared before. And then lastly, I just continue to call upon people to show grace in a time of challenge, right? And that's a time where you can be upfront with people from the very beginning. Recognize that no one has all the answers, but everybody's working to the best of their ability to provide an experience that students will look back on. Students will be able to accomplish the goals they have for themselves, and that they will really thrive as students here at UGA, because that's ultimately over the next 4 years, that's what we're hoping for. And the foundation we're building early as they start strong and continue strong this semester will be helpful to them long term.
Excellent. And one other piece of advice I would give a parent would be find ways for you to connect, even social media. I mean, if you go ahead and follow UGA on every single platform, they really do a great job of updating all that. And so you can get a little bit of information. The other piece is to constantly check in with your students. If you've got a son, I would highly recommend texting. They don't tend to answer the phone, or at least in my house, they don't. But, text them every few days and just make sure that they're connected and they're feeling connected. The girls seem to be better at talking, but even if they're not, just find a way to stay connected and get to know their community, get to know who they're with, who their friends are, their roommate, their sorority sisters, fraternity brothers, whatever world they're in. Try to understand who they are so you can have a conversation that's personal and meaningful and feel like you're part of their world while allowing them to have some freedom and independence at the same time. I don't have any more questions that have come up at this point. So unless there's anything else, I'm just going to thank everyone here for being on. Carrie and Beau, for your commitment to our students and making sure that they're cared for and loved, but also for what all you're doing to make sure that they're safe at this time. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out in any way that you can. This is part of a series, an Ask Me Anything series. I encourage you to look and see what else is coming up that you might be interested in. Jump on another one of these Zooms and see what you can learn, and encourage other people to do so as well. Now that you're part of the university, you're an ambassador. You're one of the people that helps us in all ways, shapes, and forms. So thank you for being part of this. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Wear your masks, keep distanced, and be kind to each other. Thanks so much. Have a great day.